I don't want to mince words here. Donald Trump and his allies in Washington and in St. Paul and online want to make our state a colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors. And ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. According to a new poll, nearly 70% of Minnesotans say Governor Walz needs to do more to stop fraud. In response, he is now requiring men to show 2 forms of ID when buying tampons.
Is it finally the end of the road for Tim Walz? For weeks now, he's been sidestepping the tough questions, but then Greg Gutfeld came out swinging with a major truth bomb that suddenly shifted the whole story. Gutfeld didn't just offer criticism. He pointed to a paper trail that has Walz's team scrambling to keep up. You can almost see the exact moment it clicks, when the confidence fades and the mood changes. In this video, we're digging into the details behind the newly revealed information and why some people think this could be the turning point with no easy way back. So stick around.
Walz, still a giant turd.
You got to look back about being on the debate stage with him and thinking, man, you really maybe gave this person a little too much of the benefit of the doubt. And we're a little bit, the assuming good faith was maybe a mistake with JD Vance.
Look, I'll own it. But Tim, you've been around this long enough. No, when you're on a ticket, you take your orders. Look, I have agency on that, meaning I could have done this, but I am a good team player. I would beat the out of him now if I could, and I would call that.
If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you might think. And honestly, nothing shakes up that famous Minnesota nice quite like a $259 million federal funding freeze and a primetime spotlight from late-night host Greg Gutfeld. Because when a Medicaid program somehow ends up billing for people who have already passed away, and even seems to invent a few extra days on the calendar, you can bet someone on television is going to start asking questions. And when those receipts get held up on national TV, it makes people wonder if the state government lost track of its calculator along with its oversight.
So by now you've heard about Minnesota's Somali theft rings. Somehow a third world country hijacked the state without having to kidnap Tom Hanks. And these Somali pirates claim more booty than a meeting of the J-Lo fan club. Millions of taxpayer dollars meant for meal plans were stolen, some of which were funneled to the terror group Al-Shabaab. Although having seen Somali cuisine, maybe it's better they didn't spend it on food.
And just like that, Governor Tim Walz isn't only dealing with auditors and talk of impeachment anymore. Now there's a national audience watching the whole situation unfold in real time. The federal government doesn't simply freeze $250 million without a serious reason behind it.
Different. In verbally going at it, my argument is much better.
Joe, this must hit you hard because you work out a lot, you're in great shape. You hear somebody talk trash like that, it's like, who is he trying to kid?
Total weak sauce, Greg. I can see right through it. I know when someone's not tough. And I'll say this. He kind of stole my pre-fight strategy because he said he would kick J.D. Vance's ass if I could.
That's not the bureaucratic version of a simple parking ticket. It's more like Washington looking at Minnesota and, in very polite federal language, saying, "We need answers right now." As the story started gaining attention, Gutfeld stepped in and did what he's known for. He took a complicated policy scandal and turned it into something people couldn't stop watching. He cut through the official statements, pointed out the strange details, and highlighted the situation with a blunt style that makes political spin look almost theatrical. Let's start with the billing tied to people who had already passed away. Because if there was ever a headline built for national embarrassment, that might be it. Gutfeld focused on that detail immediately, like a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. After all, few things show a system breaking down more clearly than a government program that can't tell the difference between patients who are alive and those who have already been laid to rest. The situation almost sounds like something from a satire piece, but it isn't. It involves real money, real fraud concerns, and real taxpayers left paying the price.
In 5 words.
WTF is up with Minnesota. Sean, Fox reported on the skyrocketing amount of money that Minnesota is spending on autism care. Since Tim Walz got into a governorship, it's increased 34,000% in just a few years. 2017, Autism treatment, they spent like under $2 million. 2024, $350 million.
And then there's the story of the so-called top biller who somehow managed to work 450 days in a single 365-day year. That's not dedication. That's basically a rebellion against the laws of physics. Claiming to work more than 24 hours in a day might earn you a prize in science fiction, but it definitely shouldn't qualify you for Medicaid reimbursement. When Gutfeld pointed out that claim, it wasn't just for a quick laugh. His point was to show how something so clearly impossible could slip through layers of supposed oversight. In any system that's actually paying attention, a claim like that would set off alarms loud enough to shake the building. But instead, it appears to have passed through the system as if time itself had been quietly ignored. Gutfeld kept coming back to this idea, saying that this is the moment where the jokes stop and the frustration begins. Because while it's easy to laugh at the idea of someone working 450 days in a year, it's much harder to accept what it might mean. Real children who need autism therapy could now face extra checks, longer waits, and more delays, simply because resources may have been drained by a scheme that treated diagnoses like a path to easy money.
Every minute that I spend defending my own political interest would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and the cynics who want to prey on our differences. So I've decided to step out of this race, and I'll let others worry about the election while I focus on the work that's in front of me for the next year.
Focus on the work. It's a little late for that, Tim. That's like closing the barn door after the horse opened a bogus daycare center for Somali tots.
The financial rise of Minnesota's autism program tells a pretty shocking story all by itself. Back in 2017, the payouts were about $1 million. By 2024, that number had jumped all the way to $343 million. That's not a small increase. That's more like a financial rocket taking off. And most of that growth happened during Governor Walz's time in office. On his show, Gutfeld described those numbers as the kind that should immediately raise red flags. When spending grows more than 300 times in just 7 years, responsible leadership doesn't just celebrate higher participation. It starts asking tough questions. It orders audits. It double-checks the system. It doesn't wait until federal officials step in and freeze funding before admitting something might be wrong. Now, articles of impeachment have been filed against Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison. That's far beyond a normal political disagreement, and Gutfeld's role in bringing attention to the situation has been significant. At a time when complicated state-level scandals can easily fade from the headlines, his coverage helped keep this one in the spotlight. He laid out the numbers in simple terms, raised direct questions about accountability, and kept the focus on leadership instead of letting the blame drift toward vague, unnamed bad actors.
Is this not insane?
Well, at least it's fixed autism. It's not a problem anymore.
Yes.
So we have that going for us. And what's crazy is so much of it is going to random Somalis in Minneapolis. And it actually makes me feel good because I know that they had a number cruncher back there.
Yeah.
He was looking at the spreadsheets and crunching the data. And he's like, this is the group above all others who can best care for autistic kids. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they vote entirely for Democrat and we need to pay them off.
Yeah. No, that's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, how dare you question.
Critics of Tim Walz say the warning signs about possible fraud were raised earlier but never handled with real urgency. According to these claims, audits had already pointed out problems, yet the follow-up investigations didn't move as quickly or as seriously as many people would expect when hundreds of millions of dollars are involved. If those claims turn out to be true, the story shifts from simple oversight to something that looks far more troubling. Gutfeld kept returning to the same point throughout his commentary: accountability. He argued that leaders aren't judged only by what they intend to do, but by the results that actually happen. Saying you were surprised isn't much comfort when the federal government freezes $259 million and even warns that feature cuts could climb close to $1 billion. The real question becomes why those problems weren't prevented long before things reached that point. This Medicaid controversy also arrives on top of other debates and challenges during Walz's time in office. Gutfeld tied those earlier issues into the bigger picture, suggesting that this scandal may not be a one-time mistake but part of a broader pattern. In his view, the response to problems has often seemed reactive instead of proactive, and when controversies begin stacking up over time, They stop looking like random events and start to feel more like a trend.
Committed for every crime, which of course the majority being committed by white men, asking us to do more about that. I think it's crime in general.
No wonder that Minnesota State Burn is the loon. He suggests that white men don't hold other white men accountable. Well, he's right about one white guy, him. Under this fool, the whole state's become messier than a pair of Joe Biden's tidy whities after eating bad sushi.
The federal government has now given Minnesota 60 days to come up with a full corrective action plan. That's not just a friendly piece of advice. It's more like an ultimatum written in careful bureaucratic language. If the state fails to meet those federal requirements, the financial penalties could grow even larger, possibly reaching up to $1 billion. Just hearing that number should be enough to grab everyone's attention. In his commentary, Gutfeld stressed that the real people affected here aren't the politicians defending themselves on cable news. The real people affected are the citizens and taxpayers who expect their money to be handled carefully and responsibly. He pointed out that fraud can happen anywhere, but what stood out in this case was the size of it and the boldness of it all. Billing for people who had already passed away, claiming more working days than even exist in a year, watching spending explode without immediately stopping to investigate. At some point, a situation stops looking like a series of accidents and starts feeling impossible to ignore.
In that. It isn't, but how is Walz still allowed to be in office when this is happening?
Well, because they're voting him into office. What's amazing is that you seem to look at every federal program and every state program now, and it seems to exist entirely to loot taxpayers and give it to some sort of favored political constituency. And I think the only group not getting money, Charlie, is middle-aged white males.
Yeah. Did you say it to Charlie and not me because you don't consider me middle-aged?
As hearings get closer and officials begin working on corrective plans, Walz now faces more than just legal and financial pressure. He's also dealing with a growing battle of a public perception. In politics, how things look can sometimes be just as damaging as what can actually be proven. And with these details being repeated on a national platform, they're not likely to quietly disappear into a stack of committee reports. Gutfeld's coverage has taken what might have stayed a local or regional issue and pushed it onto the national stage. By turning complicated spreadsheets and reports into clear, sharp commentary, he's kept the spotlight firmly on Minnesota's leadership. The pressure now is to deliver answers that go beyond carefully crafted statements and reassuring sound bites. The numbers themselves are hard to ignore. They're specific, measurable problems that demand more than simple deflection. For Tim Walz, the challenge now goes far beyond routine administration. Politically speaking, it's a serious test of credibility. Once public trust begins to erode, rebuilding it can be incredibly difficult. And with every new detail and every televised breakdown of the figures, the impression grows that the system may have drifted further and further away from real accountability.
The scams in U.S. history. But for years, Tim Walz ignored it in favor of supplying feminine hygiene products to students named Steve. Now he's issuing blame, but not to the fraudsters. It's Whitey's fault.
Do you want to hear more from members and leaders from the Somali community to say, we need to look at ourselves, we need to hold our own neighbors accountable?
Look, it's not law-abiding citizens. If that were the case, there's a lot of white men should be holding a lot of white men accountable.
And as Greg Gutfeld continues to highlight the inconsistencies and strange details, the story keeps gaining momentum. What once looked like simple bureaucratic mismanagement is now being viewed as a serious question about leadership, whether warnings were ignored and whether transparency was pushed aside for convenience. The people of Minnesota deserve clear answers, meaningful reform, and real accountability. They deserve a Medicaid program that protects vulnerable families instead of leaving room for exploitation, and leadership that notices when spending starts racing out of control and steps in before federal officials have to pull the emergency brake. For now, Tim Walz remains under intense pressure, facing both federal oversight and growing national attention. What makes the situation even more politically charged is the timing, because governors with national ambitions are expected to run tight, disciplined administrations, not ones surrounded by question marks. When a Medicaid program becomes shorthand for mismanagement on national television, it stops being just a local issue and starts turning into brand damage. And that's something Greg Gutfeld clearly understands, which is why he keeps framing the story not simply as a bureaucratic failure, but as a major test of leadership playing out in front of the entire country.
So the allegations of fraud were more than Tampon Tim could absorb. I wonder, has he been perfect in this?
Have I been perfect in this? God dang no. I wasn't perfect as a teacher, I wasn't perfect as a coach, I wasn't perfect as a soldier, but I was pretty damn good at all those things. Game's over for him now. It was all me, I was the bad guy or whatever. Well, put up or shut up now and tell us what you're gonna do to make this state better. Answer these tough questions, quit hiding behind this, and expect for the next 11 months for me to ride you like you've never been.
There's also the uncomfortable truth that fraud on this scale doesn't just appear overnight. For something like this to happen, systems have to be loose, controls have to be weak, and data often goes unquestioned. Somewhere along the way, warning signs likely showed up, but were treated as minor issues instead of serious alarms. Greg Gutfeld has repeatedly pushed the point that problems this large usually point to either major negligence or a culture where people are discouraged from digging too deeply, neither of which reflects well on leadership. The effects are already being felt. When federal officials freeze funding, agencies across the state begin preparing for budget cuts, delays, and backup plans. Politically, Tim Walz now faces a tough position that can't be solved with a simple press statement. If he distances himself from the agencies involved, he risks looking disconnected from his own administration. But if he takes full responsibility, critics may link every questionable claim directly back to his office. Gutfeld has focused on this dilemma, arguing that real leadership isn't only about celebrating success, it's also about facing failures directly without trying to shift the blame.
War.
So how does he go from I'm gonna whoop J.D. Vance's arse to I'm never running for office again in 48 hours?
Well, it's not Kamala's fault. She didn't kill Walz's career. Sunlight did. The guy was able to succeed because he was in the shadows. Nobody knew who he was. He operated in the darkness of layered bureaucracies, where corruption and ineptitude can fester and flourish like an open sore. And then as long as every palm is greased in these nether regions, nobody knew.
There's another factor that makes this situation even more explosive, the moral side of it. Fraud connected to large government programs can sometimes feel technical or distant, but fraud tied to children's healthcare is different. When people hear that money meant for autism therapy may have been manipulated for profit, the reaction is immediate and emotional. It's the kind of issue that crosses political lines. Greg Gutfeld has leaned into that point, framing the outrage as something bigger than party politics and more about a basic sense of fairness and decency. At the same time, the talk of impeachment keeps the matter grounded in official institutions rather than just public debate. Legislative proceedings bring formal hearings, testimony, and documented findings, which keep the story moving forward in a way viral clips alone can't. For Tim Walz, though, the situation is anything but theoretical. He's facing pressure from multiple directions: federal officials controlling funding decisions, lawmakers raising impeachment questions, and a national commentator like Greg Gutfeld continuing to spotlight the controversy. Together, those forces ensure that whatever happens next won't play out quietly, but under constant and very public scrutiny.